It's a great day, I'm feeling good. Oh, the possibilities of what I could.
What happens when a blind man, a woman of color, and a child of immigrants get together to discuss how diversity, equity, and inclusion can impact businesses?
I'm moving fast, oh, I'm optimistic.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Choose Inclusion podcast. I'm Yubi, and I am the Latino white guy of the group.
I'm Nina. I am the woman of color in the group.
And I'm Mike. I'm the blind guy.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We are on episode 5 of Choose Inclusion, here with my amazing co-hosts Nina and Mike. Hi guys.
Hi.
Que pasa?
Oh, just hanging.
Yeah.
Loving life.
A lot of
doing
traveling,
this.
a lot of enjoying those change of seasons.
Nina, you just got back from doing a conference on the East Coast, did you not?
I was at UMass Amherst speaking at the Inclusive Leadership Summit, where I was talking to the future business leaders of America, all the MBAs and business undergraduates over there. And man, did they ask some challenging questions about the future of diversity in tech.
Really?
Yeah.
That's super cool. Well, and it's cool too because things like that, I mean, I think it's so great that all of us are able to get out there and have conversations with people, and especially as it relates to the topic of today's podcast, which is mental health. I think, more and more people are realizing that this isn't just some kind of passing thing, right? Like we actually need to have conversations about mental health, especially in the workplace, because questions like, what is diversity going to look like? I mean, it's all interconnected.
Absolutely. And, I think the mental health piece of the diversity conversation is really critical because one of the stats I found recently was that, burnout from stress and anxiety is costing companies $30 billion in lost work days a year. And we know this because part of the problem is that 68% of employees never discuss mental health with their employer.
And yet, per the World Health Organization, the WHO, depression is the leading cause of disability globally.
Yeah, and I had never heard that stat until today, Mike, when you brought that up, and it's terrifying and it's scary, and it's at the same time, why is this not being talked about more often at every company?
Well, so my thought around that is, well, one, companies aren't necessarily creating a safe space to have these conversations or making it known that mental health is a conversation that we need to be having, right? And I think part of that is we've all sort of grown up, if you will, thinking that mental health conversations, it's always a stigma attached to having those conversations, and even recognizing in yourself that you have some kind of mental health issue. I think it's the number of 60% of people go untreated.
And so many, I think people associate, coming from the people with disabilities community, there's still very much a stigma and perception in and around the broader disability conversation. And so people do not want to formally or informally even dip their toe into those conversations individually.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we can do, I've been coming out recently talking about kind of my history with depression and anxiety. And, I was diagnosed with this, with depression 20 years ago. And I never talked about it in the workplace because I always feared having backlash or, kind of feared the stigma or just, feared losing my job by talking about it because there wouldn't be an understanding of it. And looking back on it now, I'm kind of wondering how different would things have been if this was a conversation that leadership and management had created a space to actually start talking about this, and how different would my experiences working at those companies have been if they had created that safe space to talk about it?
Well, and I'll give you from my personal experience of, first of all, I was involved in a workplace shooting years ago, but I was always taught to put on, this mask, right? To put on this, everything's okay, don't let anybody see you bleed, as they said in James Bond. And, and there was also that, well, I don't want to admit that something's wrong with me mentally or that I'm suffering from survivor's guilt or some kind of PTSD. So I never sought treatment until I had to, right? Like finally that that bias was overtaken by literally my health. And once I went through and sought that treatment, it's amazing the light switch that occurred in my head, to the point where I could now confidently go forward and start a business and go out and do things that I'd been wanting to do, and never felt like there was anything holding me back. So just finally admitting to myself and seeking that treatment was a game changer. And I think if more people have those conversations, especially at work, to your point about what could have been different, it's like if you felt safe enough to have the conversations and be supported in going to seek help, yeah, I mean, it could absolutely be a game changer for so many people.
So strategies in and around to help an organization out. If I'm a business leader in an organization right now, looking for strategies, Nina, what would you suggest for those business leaders?
So I kind of break it down into a couple different categories. Well, one, let's just start with benefits, because if you're an HR person listening to this podcast, you're probably thinking about benefits. Tends to be like one of the first things you think about, right? It's like, what kind of healthcare are we providing? And if your healthcare, the kind of services you're providing for your staff include wellness coaches, virtual therapy sessions. Those are key things. One of the pieces of advice I got from a company once, and I absolutely love this, they basically just went through the list of psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists on the list of healthcare, that was covered by their company insurance, health insurance.
Oh, wow.
And they just called each doctor's office and said, "Are you taking new patients?" And wrote down every doctor that said he was taking new patients, and then mapped out how far walking distance or driving distance they were from the office, and then just posted that list next to all the elevators and coffee machines and all the public spaces were the public kind of gathering areas in the company office. And something as simple as that just really decreases the barriers associated with seeking treatment.
Well, barriers and even stigmas and perceptions, again, going back to there's such a perception that if you're even if it's temporary and or a more biochemical permanent thing within causing depression and or anxiety within people, those stigmas and perceptions, it starts to stigmatize those kind of conversations in general, and recognizing like mental illness, which depression is a form of, right, doesn't mean mentally weak. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think destigmatizing those kind of conversations are critical. So I love an organization having a strategy that is that proactive.
Well, yeah, I think that points to number one, like education, I think is critical. And yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, Mike. Yes, there are the typical, the typical things we call out under the umbrella of mental health and mental illness, but when you've got numbers like 60% of people go untreated, I think that's because you don't think of things like migraines or just even headaches or something that prevents you from bringing your full self to work or being fully productive in whatever it is you're doing. Even if it's temporary, that's still leading to the 200 million work days that are lost to depression each year, or to some form of mental illness, or the $201 billion annual cost of mental illness in the U.S. Every freaking year, and so it's a great point, Mike.
Yeah, like acknowledging that this is something that needs to be addressed and educating everyone in the company about it, I think kind of decreases those barriers, right? Again, so like, suppose every company incorporated into their welcome orientation and onboarding process for every new employee, kind of all the standard things that you would think about of onboarding, but also like kind of contributed some time to talking about neurodiversity and like how the company is committed to making sure that everyone's mental health is taken care of as well, and introducing the terminology around neurodiversity and stress and depression and anxiety, and making sure that there's an opportunity for people to they might not want to disclose anything right away, but you say from day one that they started the company that this is an okay type of conversation to have here, that later down the road, if they do want to talk about it, they know it's a safe space to do that.
And one of those safe space constructs that could be really leveraged well is an ERG or BRG, so an employee resource group or business resource group within an organization. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do those types of groups. I think there needs to be a strategy in place. But yes, I think creating a safe space, which can also double as a brave place, where people can have those conversations, but they can also bring in others to have those brave conversations, because that's where I believe change will happen, is when you're able to have those brave conversations. But you do need to also have a time when you're able to safely sort of just, whether it's venting or whether it's just telling your story without any judgment. I think that's a great idea.
One of the things that, so I've started giving talks about kind of neurodiversity and, me being neurodivergent in the workplace. And one of the things I've been telling people to do is to start asking for accommodations. And I know in the disability community, Mike, this is, the word accommodations can be very loaded, but it could also be a very empowering thing to do. What are your thoughts on the idea of people who are neurodivergent, people with depression, anxiety, asking for accommodations of their employers?
So I love this conversation, and part of what my role is within Blind Institute of Technology is to, we lead with education as a mantra for organizations, recognizing that the vast majority of accommodations are less than $500. And that goes to folks who are neurodiverse. So folks that have anxiety disorders, right? There are technologies in and around that are on your iDevices and or Android devices that will monitor your heart rate and give you a bit of an alert when the technology is sensing that there's a trigger that's about to happen. So it's a very proactive, and yet, again, we think of accommodation as almost this taboo word. And our job at BIT is to educate HR professionals specifically around, what a reasonable accommodation can and will look like many times.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, lately, to me, accessibility for that few, or accommodations for the few, really ends up helping everybody. And I think, this wide range of sort of mental health issues that the majority of people in the workforce deal with, can easily be triggered, and often are, by the environment at work.
Wait. Are you saying it's stressful at works?
No.
Workplaces are stressful?
No.
Wait,
Yeah.
Did you know that, Nina?
Yeah, no, I've heard some rumors about that.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
You guys, this is all
it's
theoretical.
going around.
Yeah,
It's going around.
I had no idea. Wait, and you're saying if you're all stressed out at work, work may trigger some of that stress, and then you don't just leave it in your car before you go into the house, like that might actually trickle into the home place as well. And
Oh gosh, yeah.
no way.
Yeah, I know.
You're welcome.
Unbelievable.
That's a mic drop.
That's-
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Thanks, you, Paul. That is fantastic news. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here. I'm here to bring knowledge
thought it was
that
the good
before
looks.
has.
Oh,
yeah, right. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But Mike, you do great work in that area, and just helping, number one, educate companies on the ease with which they can set up a very supporting environment for people who are blind or visually impaired. But ultimately, it's helping them set up a structure overall that's inviting to everyone.
So much broader, and I appreciate that, because when we talk to organizations about the broader implications, so when we talk about from like policy to placement, like some of the policy, making sure that the ERG BRG construct within their organization, like first and foremost, we know that successful ERG BRG constructs, they have to have an executive sponsor.
Right.
So these are the kind of, for neurodiverse, if you want to do a broader, just enabled, different organizations use different names for call it the people with disabilities, right? So you call it enabled, call it whatever you want to call it. But, it'd be fantastic if one of the leaders of an organization who struggles with anxiety, depression, is willing to step their foot into that and acknowledge that. That goes a long ways to telling, right, the individual contributors within the organization that this is a safe place.
Yeah, that's huge. Completely agree. Well, before we want to introduce a new segment called Mic Drop, but before we get to that, Nina, what you've often talked about sort of the red, yellow, green, the traffic light thing. What's that? Because I think that's one easy way that companies can start to address this conversation.
Yeah, it's a concept that I introduced to my team for my startup diversity when we were in the process of building an app and having to kind of build a business from the ground up. And we were up to a team of about 5 or 6 people. So being able to kind of get a temperature check on how everyone was doing mentally each day without having to ask them, are you depressed today? Are you about to have an anxiety attack? You don't have to get really personal to create safe spaces for people who are neurodivergent. And so what we would do is at the beginning of every meeting, we would just say, let's do a quick traffic light check-in. And I gave everyone an article about what the traffic light check-in was first when on onboarding time. So the idea was that you would say you're either red, yellow, or green. Red means you're just having a really rough day. You're not going to be performing at your best. And you just kind of want to give people that heads up. Yellow means is like you're not at your optimum, but you're still functioning and still able to do stuff. Green means like you're good to go and you're going to be at your best today. And so every person would just say, I'm yellow today or I'm green today, and then move on. And it was a quick one word. And so that way you would get a sense from the room, where were people at? So if you said you were yellow today and, 3 hours down the line, you kind of snapped at me when I asked you a question, I'm not going to take it as personally and say like, why does UB hate me? Why is he so mad at me? And, I would just be like, you know what? UB's having a yellow day. It's okay. I'm not going to like hold on to this. And same thing with like what I also noticed was that when other people were having red days, people on the team wanted to step up and help out. And not by being intrusive and saying like, hey, what's causing you to be red? But really like, oh, okay, can you not dive into the code today? That's totally fine. Why don't you kind of do this data entry thing that needs to get done today that doesn't require as much of a mental load? And, I'll take on some of this other work. And people just wanted to start helping each other out by creating something as simple as just a red, yellow, green into the beginning of every meeting.
That's fantastic. I love that technique, and think about, especially in technology organizations where, whether it's the methodology of Agile or just the stand-up construct, right, where that could easily fit into that, and to allow organizations and teams to work more cohesively and be able to speak a language that is supportive of this topic, right? So I love that construct. That's true leadership that you did, Nina.
Cool.
Well, it, like you said, Mike, it blends right in with what people are doing anyway, right? And I think that's the key to developing, real strategies and real habits to create these more inclusive and safe workplaces, is to give people things like this that can be a part of their day-to-day. So they're doing it every day. It's just natural. It becomes natural. And it really, I think you start to see that change over time because people will become more empathetic, I think. It's a way to practice empathy. You can learn empathy. Right? Is that people think that, no, you are who you are and that's it. No, you can learn these things.
So we're going to be putting a list of resources on our website associated with every podcast. With some of the kind of tips and tricks that we've learned about, some of the stats we've been pulling and mentioning. And if our listeners have any kind of links to articles or other resources they want to share with us, please DM that to us over our Twitter account at Choose Inclusion, because we want this to be a place where everyone can continue to learn from each other.
Totally agree.
We're looking for massive contribution from our audience, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. The expertise does not land solely in this one room, in this one podcast. Yes.
That's a stress reliever right there.
Yeah.
So so like we said earlier, we're going to introduce a new concept called mic drop. And these are words of wisdom from our dear co-host and friend, Mike Hess. So Mike, no pressure, but whenever you're ready, we'd like to hear your mic drop.
Yeah, and by the way, this was introduced to me about 20 minutes ago. So thank you, Nina and Ubaldo. So a mic drop.
You have the name. It's your fault.
Yeah. So my mic drop for today, following on the theme of neurodiversity, reasonable accommodations. Ladies and gentlemen, reasonable accommodations is a term that can be widely used for women who are pregnant, for people who have migraines, depression, anxiety. It is much broader than just blind, visually impaired, people from the deaf community, people in wheelchairs. So often we have this correlation to reasonable accommodations fixed in our minds. and recognizing that every single one of us at some point in life needs some kind of an accommodation. We need to get rid of the stigma and start looking at people that truly have diversity qualities and be accommodating to all.
Nice mic drop. I like it.
And on that note, episode 5 out.
Bye, everyone.
Later.
Thanks for listening to the Choose Inclusion podcast. Special thanks to our producer, Spencer Cross and VP Legacies, which helps increase your employee and customer retention utilizing corporate communication strategies. Find out more at vplegacies.com. Make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you can see closed captioning for this podcast on our YouTube channel. We'll be publishing a new episode on the first Thursday of every month, and you can find us online on our website, chooseinclusion.com, or contact us on Twitter @chooseinclusion.